I've been working on my case for 5 years. So I know my case better than an attorney can learn it in 2 years. But
During Robertson's time investigating this bizarre and tragic case, most of his questions have been answered. But today, days away from the start of yet another trial, the biggest that remains is why.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't breathe. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
I'm Nate Eaton, and this is True Crime Rocket Science.
Indeed it is, as one book reviewer wrote, the most insightful voice in true crime. That came from a review just a couple of days ago. Does anyone know whether Nate Eaton has dealt with the why of this case? And have you thought about it? What's your answer to the why?
I'm not sure we've ever really gotten to the why, or it's certainly not a why that any of us can quite understand. We're all trying to come up with rational explanations for these irrational acts. I don't think we'll ever get there.
Well, I do, and I'm quite surprised that someone can be so dismissive of the question. I think we should try, and I don't think it's such a hard question to answer. And I'm going to tell you why in this analysis. Before we get to that, just a reminder that I traveled to Boise, Idaho, and spent days, weeks actually, commuting to court from my Airbnb and back. Sometimes I sat feet away directly opposite to Lori Vallow and her defense team in court. I studied her in person. We even made occasional eye contact. And I have to say, if Karen Reed is America's happiest murder defendant right now, Lori Vallow undoubtedly was the happiest murder defendant in April 2023. It was hard to believe the smiling, laughing, joking, bemused woman in court in front of me each day was standing trial for the murders of her own children, as well as her new husband Chad's wife, that's Tammy Daybell.
Yeah. Obviously, you were convicted of killing your kids. Where does that
wrongly
disconnect?
Convicted.
You believe wrongly convicted?
Absolutely, 100%.
You know, when Lori was in court in April 2023, she seemed giddy, she seemed happy, she seemed lighthearted, she seemed nonchalant. Everyone in court seemed to be aware that she was on trial for the murder of her own children except Lori herself. And I think that is a key part to understanding why. Because we find out why by knowing who we are dealing with. And who we are dealing with here is someone who's charged with the murder of her ex-husband and the attempted murder of Brandon Boudreaux.
He's right here in the living room. Firearm's going to be in the front door, in the front bedroom, laying on the ground next to a case. We didn't have any of that as of right now.
And here's a glimpse of the smiling, smug Lori moments after Charles is shot dead, quipping with a cop on body cam outside the scene.
How long have you lived here?
Like 3 weeks.
Oh, geez. Yeah, okay.
That's why the neighbors didn't know I was there.
Gotcha.
Like, hi neighbor, sorry.
Are you working at all?
No.
Okay.
Remember, I'll be doing a live stream tomorrow on day 1 of the trial. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, please hit the thanks button and let's get started. Did you guys know that I meant to write a book on the Vallow case? It would have been one of the final books in a series of over 100 narratives. In May 2000, I designed this cover, which is always a precursor to starting a new book. Of course, shortly after this, the Gabby Petito case happened, which swallowed up the second half of 2020. And so I ended up writing 2 different books, one on John Bonet called Christmas Star and another on the 1996 Everest disaster. And then I felt like I was done writing, which means I never really got round to finishing this one. Now, I have often said this case, the Lori Vallow case, also known as the DOOMSDAY MOM case or the Doomsday cult case, well, I've always said it ought to be one of the highest profile cases in America. I mean, one could argue that with a body count of at least 4 people between them, Lori and Chad ought to be considered serial killers. And bear in mind, there are also other crimes of theft, also crimes of attempted murder. And these crimes include crimes with accessories, with Lori's brother acting on her behalf, and then also the murders of her own children, the murders of Chad's wife. And that is how horrific this situation is. Not just the serial killing, it's the serial killing of family members. And so in this analysis, we'll also try to deal with that question. Why is it not such a high-profile case? And in my opinion, it's because both the who and the why seem so unfathomable, so unknown, so beyond our understanding, just as the investigator noted.
It's certainly not a why that any of us can quite understand. We're all trying to come up with rational explanations for these irrational acts. I don't think we'll ever get there.
And I think what this investigator is saying echoes a lot of the sentiments of a lot of the people out there. It's just, wow, we just don't understand what is going on. Well, I think I do, and we're going to get to that in the next few minutes.
No weapons? No weapons on me. All right, come on out this way. Yep. I'm going to have you have a seat right here on the curb.
Yep. Who else is in the house? No one else is in the house. Okay, just have a seat right there. Let's get FD in here.
Yeah.
Have a seat.
18 seat secure. We got the gentleman out. Have fire rolling. Chandler Police Department, anybody inside, make yourself known.
Come on into the seat and secure.
We got one subject down, apparent gunshot wounds to the chest.
So the why in this case may seem like rocket science, maybe it is to some, but if you know Lori, it's actually fairly simple. But let's do an experiment. Take out your notebooks, write down the question, why? Why did Lori do what she did? What is her motive? Stop this video right now, take a second, maybe a minute, to just think about that. Then write down your answer. You can also write it in the comments right now. And that brings us to 3 perspectives on understanding the why. Number 1, Lori's defense. Now, it's okay if for a few seconds when dealing with this question, you draw a total blank. This case sort of does that because it is kind of nonsensical. I just hope you're not saying it's because of narcissism, because all of us do what we do based on some form of narcissism, some form of self-interest. Now, when Lori's trial began on April 3rd, 2023, in Boise, Idaho, she didn't testify in her own defense. Her lawyers didn't call any witnesses either. And that's certainly a question that is arising in this trial. Is Lori going to testify this time?
Do you plan to take the stand yourself in your own trial?
Haven't decided yet. Don't need to decide that. Legally, you don't have to decide. So we're going to see how it goes.
Now, in her first trial dealing with the murders of her children and Tammy Day Bell, her lawyers didn't call any witnesses either. Remember, the prosecution called about 60 people to testify. Lori's case, and she knew it, was that she had no case. Lori's defense, and she knew it, was that she had no defense. She would later say in an interview that Tylee killed JJ, and then Tylee killed herself. Lori is a champion of using words to conjure reality. That may have worked with the feeble minds that she surrounded herself with, but a murder investigation tends to involve more than a cursory inquiry. Although it has to be said, the murder of Charles Vallow was initially dismissed as a self-defense case. In other words, the cops initially took Lori's word for what happened. So yes, that was pretty weak-minded of them, and I guess it's taken a while for minds to catch up with Lori's mischief. Incidentally, in Chad Daybell's trial, he almost had no defense either. The trial of her partner in crime was basically a repeat of the facts and evidence of Lori's case. The main difference was that Chad's family testified that Tammy wasn't healthy before she died, while other people testified that she was. And of course they found against Chad as well. He was also convicted of her murder as well as the murders of the Lori's children. Now, I do think that had the feeble minds around Lori, including the cops, graduated to critical thinking earlier, faster, quicker, instead of hoping and praying for some sort of happy ending, if they'd confronted her earlier, there wouldn't have been 4 murders. If they dealt with the murder of Charles Vallow properly there and then, sorted it out, figured it out, you wouldn't have had other murders. Also, if the disappearance of JJ had been dealt with properly at the time, Tylee probably wouldn't have disappeared and also been murdered. Now, Lori got away with what she got away with because she had the gift of the gab, but also because the people around her were so utterly gullible. Number 2, it's complicated. I think a real reason why the Vallow case isn't popular is because it seems to be a complicated, boundaryless, unfathomable mess when actually it's ridiculously simple. It seems complicated because there are so many victims. There's so many victims, it's hard to know whether some of the dead aren't victims as well, including her brother, which would make it 5 victims, and another ex-husband, which would make it 6. And there's even a case that there could be even more. There is also at least one potential murder which she's on trial for now as well, besides the murder of her ex-husband Charles Vallow. There is this attempted murder, and so it just makes the whole thing more and more complicated. And these crimes are taking place in different states. Now there's the issue of multiple perpetrators, accessories, and in the Ramsey case, we know how the notion of this can be not just confusing, but confounding. There's also the geographic nature of this case. It plays out in Arizona, in Idaho, and Hawaii, and various places in between. And yet it's not really more complicated than any other case. Dynamics take a while to figure out, sure, but that's true in any case. The cult stuff is merely background noise, not very different from the Shanann Watts MLM business. You just need to know the concept of that is Kool-Aid. And I mean, if you want to figure out how the Kool-Aid, the ingredients of the Kool-Aid, well, whatever they are, it's still Kool-Aid. But in a real sense, every case has its Kool-Aid. It's as simple as a woman who decides she wants a better life but doesn't have the money to finance it. That's literally what is going on in this case. And it starts with the murder of Charles Vallow and Lori's expectation that she would get insurance money out of that. The prosecution will likely argue that Lori had people at her beck and call, ready and willing and able to carry out the devil's work, Lori's bidding, but in the name of God. But make no mistake, the motive here was greed, one of the most basic and ordinary motives in true crime. And if you can't see that, it's kind of shocking to have such a basic motive and be like, I really don't know what happened here.
What's going on? Why is she here and you're not here, or are you staying here with her?
Long story. She's had kind of a break from reality. She thinks you're LDS?
Yes.
She thinks she's married to Moroni in the past.
You think she's what?
Was married to Moroni at the top of the temple.
Angel Moroni. LDS. Angel.
They don't let me in there.
Probation, and she knows when the second coming is happening next year, so does a prophet.
Okay.
He knows it, she knows about it. She meets with Moroni.
Now, it actually doesn't matter if you missed all of that conversation or you didn't even listen to that conversation. It's Kool-Aid. And guess what? Charles Vallow, who to his credit smelled a rat and sensed how loopy Lori was, she was just going off the rails. He changed his life insurance to make sure Lori didn't inherit. And guess what? She didn't. And so, of course, when that happened and Lori wasn't on the cosh for murder, she simply tried to get social grant payments from her dead children to finance the next chapter of her life. This didn't work, well, let's try that. And of course, her kids weren't part of her dream vacation in Hawaii. How would Chad feel about taking the kids along? A key reason why Lori didn't say where Tylee and JJ were and why she needed to maintain the ruse that they were simply out there somewhere was so she could continue to collect Social Security survivor benefits allocated for the care of her children. Make no mistake, Lori was accused and found guilty of theft as well, theft in the sense of appropriating benefits meant for her children. The jury also found Lori guilty on that count. And that then brings us to the answer to the question we're asking, the why. Well, number 3, the why is not rocket science.
Okay. But she's lost her mind. I don't know how else to say it. We're LDS. She thinks she's a resurrected being and a god.
But like the Joker in Batman, it's easy to dismiss him as crazy. Actually, he's not. And he'll tell you the same.
You're crazy. I'm not. No, I'm not.
If Lori is crazy, she wouldn't know what to lie about or how to lie about, and she'd be really, really bad at representing herself. Well, I'm not saying she's going to be good at it, but she'll probably do a fairly decent job. If you've been watching some of the pre-trial motions, you can see that can be sensible when she wants to be. Lori representing herself is quite a representative insight into Lori as a person, seemingly delusional, apparently in denial, but actually crafting her own reality, conjuring reality with words, with lies. She's actually very good at sort of narrative staging, if that's the word, just creating stories. That's not craziness. That's just a schemer. And Lori is quite clever with this. I mean, how does she explain the murders of her own children? Tylee killed JJ and then herself. It's quite a clever ruse. Not true, but nevertheless, quite from a scheming perspective, quite clever. So the motive for all the murders, including Tammy, was greed. People were killed for money because Lori didn't have a job. You actually hear her say so at the end of one of those body cam excerpts. And Chad was poor. He was poor as a church mouse. He's a failing author, but he was happy to do Lori's bidding. And I do think that Lori was basically the puppet master. She was the one pulling everyone's strings. Chad was sort of pandering to her by providing Kool-Aid for everyone to drink, in a way. And Chad's job, I think, was to make it divinely official so that the likes of Alex would carry out what they wanted to do and think it was God's work. So Lori's motive is garden variety greed and greedy self-interest. And what does Lori want at the end of the day? Well, the same thing most of us want, a better life. And you can see that in this image. This is where they are, where they want to be. This was the life that Lori wanted. And this is what Chad wanted. Just look at this. Tonight I figured out who I feel like. I'm a grown-up version of Harry Potter who has to live with the Dudleys in his little space under the stairs. Every few weeks I get to escape and have amazing adventures with my goddess lover. But then I have to return to my place under the stairs, feeling trapped. But I sense permanent freedom is coming. And some of you may remember that Chad and Lori sort of made up like a fictional story about themselves, where Chad would give Lori a different name and give himself a different name and sort of make this sort of fictional story up. And that is what they are experts in, peddling fictions. And so you can see these aren't complicated people. These are simpletons with overly simplistic fantasies for themselves, but not the means to bring it about. Chad, as I say, was a failed author, poor as a church mouse. Lori was a hairdresser and a one-time beauty queen. And so when we fail to fathom the why, it's because we're doing the same thing, simply not willing to put in the effort to try, simply not even trying to think. How many other cases involve cults? Well, think about Jodi Arias, think about Chris Watts, think about Alex Murdaugh. How many other cases invoked God? Well, think about the Ramseys, think about the McCanns, think about Chris Watts. And that then brings us to this question, why isn't this case high profile? I'm not going to deal with it here, but I do want to ask you guys why you think that is the case. Because this case really ought to be the biggest, most high profile case in America. Anyway, I'm not going to take it further than that. Opening statements in Lori Vallow's trial, that's the first Arizona trial, are set to begin on Monday. And I will be covering those right here on this channel.
This trial is going to be a circus.
Thank you for listening. Please join me in the live stream on Monday, and I'll see you guys next time.